My name is Samra Kazmi, and I'd like to welcome you to the first ever session of ZepoTalks, where we dive deep into the realities of modern cybersecurity and digital resilience. My name, as I said, is Samra Kazmi, and I'll be your moderator today. I am the Chief Innovation Officer at Resurge, a company that helps advises enterprise CISOs in navigating the challenges of cyber as well as digital resilience. I have been a two-time CISO before and very well aware of the challenges. So today's topic is one that's at the forefront of every security leader's mind, and that is really to strengthen digital resilience across hybrid environments. We're joined today by two exceptional leaders in the industry who bring both strategic vision and practical insight to the table. And I'm really excited to facilitate this dialogue, unpack some hard truths, also spark a conversation that I know many of you are already having inside your organizations. And I do believe that our esteemed panelists will be able to give you some very good, actionable advice as we go on. So let's get right into it. And before we get into the conversation, I would like to ask our panelists to introduce themselves. So starting with you, Christina, go ahead.
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. Should I give a little background on myself?
Sure, yes.
So my background's engineering. I'm an entrepreneur and executive in the cybersecurity space. I'm also on the board of a public company that's in the secure semiconductor space. And I also teach cybersecurity at Columbia University. And, I focus a lot on the areas of forensics and risk assessments for public companies with my role at Crimson Vista.
Wow, thank you very much. That's great. Antonio?
So, hello, Sandra. Hello, Christina. I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed. It sounds like very modest from Sandra, like how she introduced herself, that she's one of the most successful cybersecurity leaders in Wall Street and in the New York City area. And I like how she introduced herself. So I'm a bit overwhelmed. And Christina, you are a rock star in the space. So I'm just another worker, one of the founders at Zepo Intelligence, a platform that is really reshaping how organizations and society should think about social engineering.
That's great. So, just to set the stage, I'd love to ask both of you as to what you're seeing as current and emerging trends in cybersecurity right now. So maybe, Christina, would you like to share some of those insights?
I think that you have a couple of trends. One is that the threat landscape is becoming, is much more complex, right? Because you have more IoT devices. And while, you've got these tools at AI that can help CISOs and people within organizations try to protect their space, they're also helping hackers, right? So there are tools, out there that allow you to have visibility on every IoT device that's in a particular geography. There's ways of capturing and ingesting massive amounts of social media to be able to do social engineering. And so there's a lot of information that's available out there to target specific individuals with very specific information that today fools even people who are a little bit more sophisticated than the people that joined en masse during the pandemic and were sort of forced to take on, digital interfaces in order to get things done. So it's, and obviously with, some of the, diplomatic challenges, or should I say, the politics that are going on. I mean, cyber is a tool that is used. Some countries actually generate a lot of revenue from the theft of information, or actually even money. So I would say that because of all these complexities, I would say that the trends are growing.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. I'd like perhaps to add to that, over the last 20 years, 25 years, we have seen how cybersecurity has been mostly, I've seen most of the capital deployed to protect infrastructure, so hardware and software. However, over the last few years, we've seen how social engineering is becoming more and more relevant. And since 2021, 22, with the whole Gen AI disrupting the industry, we see making it easier, faster, and cheaper than ever for threat actors, which, by the way, they're no longer humans. It can be just technology to craft highly personalized, convincing, and scalable attacks. So I think it's terrifying, and everything that relates to social engineering, so exploiting human vulnerabilities, is something that is really getting a hot trend.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
would even add to that.
Yeah,
I
go
was just
ahead.
going to say that from a social engineering perspective, the ability to harvest information about where somebody goes to church and school, and so you're like trying to figure out, or these hackers are trying to figure out, well, if their kids are at school here, how can I, target them with respect to some sort of a message? All of that was done, I think, more slowly in the past, but now you can harvest that information in mass and really create this profile that allows for a very detailed, message that really could throw some people off or create the, fear or some sort of level of anxiety that doesn't allow them to think clearly and make mistakes.
Yeah, I think that's both of you made these great points. One, Christina, you talked about all these non-human risks like IoT and other types of technology, but also to add to that, we have the human aspect of it. And Antonio, you mentioned, and both of you mentioned social engineering. Perhaps we can dive a little bit deeper into it and talk about what social engineering is and what it means today. So I know, Christina, you mentioned a little bit, but how about maybe jumping a little bit more into it?
Yeah, I think the best way to understand what social engineering is to think about all those techniques that are leveraged by cyber criminals. And again, to reinforce and repeat it again, cyber criminals are no longer humans. It can be technology. And are those techniques that are leveraged by these to exploit those human vulnerabilities. Historically, we've seen those human vulnerabilities exploited in common platforms where we were spending all our time, right? Which was in the corporate world, it was mostly email. However, nowadays, the threat landscape is much broader, and as work will move well beyond email, we see those vulnerabilities exploited in a myriad of platforms, and that's taking place not just in the professional side, but also on the personal side. So it's very interesting how this is really driving organizations crazy.
But also, if you think about how humans are the biggest threat vector that an organization has, and what was it, 70 or 80% the threats come through that, the stakes are pretty high. And right now, over the past, it was last year, the SEC, has required publicly held companies to disclose their risk, disclose how they're managing and detecting and defending against that risk, and then what they're doing when a risk presents itself. So the risk is high for executives. In the past, it wasn't as financially problematic when these problems occurred. And if you read the news headlines, the number of attacks that are coming through employees, maybe working from home, and the cost of those attacks, it's growing very substantially. So it's a huge problem. And it's probably more because of the sophistication of the AI being able to pull all these pieces of information about people. Even people who don't use social media do leave footprints that they're probably not aware of.
I think, Sandra, something that really concerns me and that makes of this industry a very interesting one, at least to work for and to bring solutions to help. I'm going to illustrate that with a use case. It was a big technology company, and this happened a few months ago. The CFO was about to leave the company, so when that happened, the clients of this technology company got an email from the old CFO asking for like a pending bill. There was like some like 100K transfer to be made, etc. There were like more than 25 clients that made that transfer. So it's not just the case and the fact that they transfer the money, which of course is scary, is the fact that technology and cyber criminals had been, most likely profiling this person for a long time
I'm sure.
and waiting for that moment to pull the trigger, right? And that's what scares me, is that I think there are two types of people in society nowadays: those who know that they have been attacked, and those who don't know yet that they have been attacked, which means that everyone has been attacked already. And the profiling about you in particular is somewhere there. So it'll eventually happen, right? And that's what scares me about this particular industry.
Yeah, and that is definitely something, especially like if you're receiving an invoice or instructions. Are there any new? I mean, we've heard a lot about things like training employees. Do you really think that that helps? And I know that in my corporate life, I would receive a lot of these training modules around phishing, etc. But I personally, having been a CISO myself, I haven't seen that to really deter the threats. What different types of threats are we seeing now, and how is training really helping the traditional way that we train our employees?
I would actually say that it does help. And, just to use as a contrast, when you look at all of the sort of non-digital natives that were forced to go online during the pandemic, right? And the effect of not being trained as they embarked on having to do everything online, and the fact that now that they're so heavily targeted is an example of what happens when you don't train. I mean, I think that people will always sort of dismiss the, I have to get this done type thing because they're in the middle of a project or a deadline, right? But the reality is that something still sticks in that education process because not everybody has been aware of, for example, making sure that you look at the domain name of where something came from before you open it or click or forward it or pay the bill, right? So having these educational capabilities does, and especially if they're engaging, really does help at least make people aware of the fact that these things are happening. I mean, there is some percentage of people that are aware, but it's really, really important to make sure that people understand that they're a target and they're the weakest link that an organization has.
I like to add a nuance there. I do believe in training, but not in the way it's being delivered, and not just in the cybersecurity industry. And this brings me back to I don't know, when I was in university, I spent part of my academic career in Germany. And something that drove me to Germany was actually the academic system, right? We always heard that in Germany, you learn by doing, right? So I feel like taking for granted that your employees and someone is actually interested in cybersecurity, that's a big assumption. And I don't think it is true, then it's never going to be true. I totally, when security leaders come to us and say, hey, I don't know why our employees are not engaged with these and what can we do? They're never going to be engaged. And that's fine. That's totally fine. Cybersecurity is obscure. Cybersecurity is challenging. So assuming that, we should invest so much efforts in bringing those levels of engagement to a level that are not realistic, that doesn't make much sense. So we believe in training, but we believe in training in a way where, our employees learn by doing, learn by, in this case, leveraging technology, right? So how can you expose them to real situations so that they can learn how to manage those when those events take place? So that's a little caveat, but that it's a whole different way of dealing with a challenge that has been there already for a decade, if not longer, and that I'm surprised when I still see very large organizations exposing their employees to boring and large trainings that, of course, are not going to be followed.
Well, didn't they have a scenario in which there was some corporate requirement for some level of training in which the people weren't even engaged in it? They were doing something else, and somehow they got caught. Was it, for some CLE credit or something to that effect? So, you make a very good point there.
And by the way, this is something we're working very closely also with regulators, because from a compliance standpoint, when you go to, like global or international standards such as ISO or SOC, they require and they're urging companies, to train their employees. And therefore, like compliance teams and ultimately like security teams are obsessed with, checking the box. And that's why we're working very closely with those regulators to, help them understand that this is probably not the only way. Let's put it that way, that not the only way. So training is needed, but it has to be like reshaped.
No, I agree with you.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say I agree, because it has to be woven into the fabric of what people do. Otherwise, it's you're just trying to distract them from things that they have to get done, and they're just going to push back.
Yeah, I feel like, this is definitely one of those things where people look at such trainings, but also look at security, privacy as sort of a blocker, not a business enabler. And I think there needs to be this reframe within the culture, and probably like, the leadership needs to enforce it more than, as you said, Antonio, that this just being a check the box exercise. So is there anything, that can be done from transforming or even reframing the digital culture from within, by leadership, just by and through training? Is there anything that comes to mind?
Take the lead.
Well, I definitely think that the awareness aspect is important, because you don't always have everybody at the same level of digital experience, right? So you have to have some level of awareness. I do think that, for example, when you hear these stories about a particular company transferring $100 million without actually calling to verify somebody on the other end, that is sort of a startling number. And I think that creates a level of awareness to other people in the industry who think, okay, note to self, before I send something, maybe I should call the person on the other and make sure that I'm sending it to the right person. There's been a lot of news about these older women who were not digital natives, who get these texts and get into these relationships digitally or virtually or whatever the right word is, and end up sending money. I think there was an SEC enforcement in California for a Bitcoin ATM machine company. Company provides that service because there were women who were being sort of attacked by these non-existent Romeos, love interests, who urgently needed money, and of course was sent over these ATM machines. And so I guess the SEC felt that they should have more of a mechanism to prevent this kind of thing from happening. So as I said in the beginning, I think that the threat landscape has become so complex that when you hear these news stories, and you start to realize, wow, that's an interesting twist. I think the awareness makes people realize how tricky this space can be.
Yeah, I think, and I'd like to quote here one of the experts in this industry that it says like that you're aware doesn't mean that you care.
Oh, true.
and that's why, for example, we at Zepo Intelligence, we help our clients, once all these simulations, trainings, and overall social engineering techniques have been leveraged and used, what can we do with the data?
Yeah.
And so we worked on a myriad of use cases, speaking of like, performance management, consequence management. How can now this data being used by other teams in the organization? How can HR, work with you so that from a performance standpoint, an employee can understand that this matters?
Mhm.
How can the technology team or the compliance teams understand that if something has not been done correctly, there's a consequence that can be applied in the technology space? So in order, back to your question, Sandra, in order to reshape that culture from within, I think it's also about, letting those cybersecurity leaders and their teams in charge of their awareness programs know that, there are ways to, take this data forward and engage with other teams in the organizations, with other stakeholders, to make sure that ultimately you care.
Yeah, I think that's great. So it almost seems like just like technology, and what I've seen is there's as you mentioned earlier, this is usually a check the box exercise, and after that it's mostly all about throwing technology at the problem, and not really engaging that human factor, and it's kind of falls by the wayside. You offer them training and you don't really do anything, or maybe not even collect the results. And then in this case, as we were talking about the Zepo approach, which is where you collect the data and then see what can be done and how to motivate employees and how to create those consequences. It does seem like that there is that reframe that is happening. So I would like to know, like, how do you think, what is the role of leadership in this reframe? Even when we have this data, does leadership need to come in? And also, whether it's the CISO themselves, or it's individual managers across the board, what would their role be in this case?
Well, I would say that considering the new SEC requirements for 2024, in which publicly held companies require the disclosure of how they're managing risk, or how they're measuring risk, and then what they're doing to manage that risk, becomes a lot more important. I mean, I think you saw a lot of people using sort of blanket language in their disclosures last year, but that's not going to fly going forward. So really understanding what the risk factors are within organizations, and then really putting together a plan requires senior management to sign off on that, right? And so I think there has to be a lot more communication and a lot more understanding and more education, because you can't just check the box, because the liability goes all the way up, right? And I think that the financial stakes will be even greater for organizations that don't comply. And whilst there are a lot of companies that aren't public, there are a lot of regulated companies out there that fall under this umbrella of having to make sure that they actively measure what their risk is and then defend against those risks actively, because otherwise they're going to be in deep trouble.
I think as leaders, what you can do in your organization is to empower your teams. And empowering your teams doesn't mean like, providing them with budget. So we are seeing how cybersecurity budgets are increasing, and in particular in our category, which is great. Mm-hmm. But I think there are many other ways in which you can support your teams. So you can become an ambassador of your program. You can really believe in it, because sometimes we see like some senior leaders not understanding why so much capital is being deployed into technology, and in particular into cybersecurity. So perhaps, being more sensitive, or at least try to understand why this is becoming more relevant and why this is happening, that could also help. So, long story short, I think like becoming an ambassador of this program and spread the word, I think this is something like, that potentially could help drive that change from within.
yeah, I guess, that ownership by the employees themselves can really help. Well, thank you both. This has been a great conversation. I think, and very, very insightful, obviously, but what is that one or two things that you would want the audience to take away? What can they do this week to start building this culture that is more resilient versus reactive as we see?
I think I know that we're getting some questions from the audience, like requesting like to see if they can see something live. So while I prepare that, perhaps Christina, you can answer to Sandra's question, and then what I can do is show one of our those deep bay calls in
Oh, that'd be
action.
great.
So I can get that ready if you want.
While you do that. So I was going to say that people are the biggest asset that an organization has, by far, biggest asset, but they're also the biggest risk, right? 70, 80% of the risk comes through humans. And so on one side of the coin, you want to make sure that you take care of people. And then the other side of the coin, you also want to make sure that those people you're taking care of are also taking care of the organization, because you don't want them to make a mistake. And then there's this other piece of it, which I was mentioning before. I mean, I remember, being in the office of the CEO and some of the board members of a large financial firm. We were talking about cybersecurity, and this chairman CEO sort of laughed, and he thought, oh, that's something somebody else deals with. And I explained to him, and he said, oh, well, my financial institution is basically very well protected, because we don't do anything in the cloud. Everything is within confined space. And I said to him, I could create these really cute USB sticks and leave them in the lobby, and your employees could take them upstairs and plug them in, and I would be in regardless of what's going on with your data center. And I thought he was going to jump out of his chair, but he said, we have people that deal with that. And I thought, well, you have to deal with that, because now, I mean, this was a number of years ago, where the visibility into cyber wasn't as important at the boardroom, but of course now it is. So I'm sure that they're saying different things at that organization.
Especially if you add a note that says compensation plan 2016, like everyone will open that file. We're seeing that a lot.
Exactly.
Okay, so I'm gonna share something live, and basically, one of our clients already a year ago approached us with a request and a concern, right? They were, our C-level, our VIPs are getting more and more calls. They're more curated. We're concerned that they're answering to those calls, and eventually they're following those requests, right? So could you help us build something so that we could train and prepare them for these types of threats? And that's why we decided to build what I'm going to show live is basically an agent that is calling you and is targeting your employee as if it were a real conversation. I don't know if it's going to be a level very basic or an advanced level, but bear with me. I guess in this particular case, it's an HR lady that is targeting an employee. I just said that the employee's name is Christina, is working at Apple, and let's see what happens. So I'll get the call started.
Well, the HR space is one in which there's a lot of fake, recruiters out there that are calling people up to get a lot of personal information, and people are under the impression that they're.
Here is the call, Christina. Sorry to interrupt. Hello, who is this? I don't know if you can hear that. Can you hear that?
I can't hear that.
Oh, let me see, because it was muted. Let me try again. It was muted. Hello, who is this?
Hello, Christina. I'm Ashley Johnson from the Human Resources Department at Apple. We are updating our database and need to confirm some employee information. Could you please help me by verifying your full name and current address?
Yes, absolutely, Ashley. My name is Christina Tolan, and I'm here, but who are you and what do you need exactly?
Thank you, Christina. As I mentioned, I'm Ashley Johnson from the Human Resources Department. We are conducting a routine update of our employee database, and we need to ensure all records are accurate and complete. To do this, we require your full name and your current personal address. This is a standard procedure to avoid any administrative issues and to ensure we have the correct contact information on file.
I'm sorry, Ashley, but I'm currently in a podcast, so I'm busy. I don't know if you could call me later, let's say after 5 p.m. Eastern time.
No problem at all, Christina. I understand you're busy. I'll make a note to try and reach you after 5 p.m. Eastern time. Thank you for letting me know.
Thanks to you. So, of course, there is, I think we are playing now with one of our basic levels where latency is played on purpose, like with some slight delay so that we can give employees with some hints about, how to identify that this is like a fake call and not a real one. But yes, the purpose of this exercise is to eventually let the employee know that he was being targeted and that she, or in this case, Christina, was or not deceived. And it's been very powerful. And they love that because back to Sandra's question before about how can you make people or leaders, become more relevant or ambassadors of these programs by making them more sensitive about the situation and knowledgeable. They really become like advocates for these types of solutions and learning by doing, which is pretty fun.
I can imagine if you've participated in something like that, it even becomes somewhat humorous that you either got tricked or that you didn't get tricked, or so it is very engaging.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think like even though people like us are much more aware, I constantly feel instinctually I fall into that trap, and I have to like step back and maybe pause before I take an action because it could or could not be real. So this was such an amazing simulation, and just to be clear, that was not an actual human, correct? That was just a simulation by technology.
Do you mean that AI is not human, or no? I was just joking. No, it is not. So it was a real AI thing.
And this is what our audience can do with Zepo, basically create their own simulations and scenarios. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. So again, as I said at the very beginning, work has moved well beyond email, and we understand that those human vulnerabilities can be exploited in many different platforms. So we have a bunch of use cases that go well beyond the traditional attack vector, email phishing, so that we can not only get organizations ready, but also help them identify those alerts in real time and make them better.
Wow, thank you so much. What a fantastic conversation. We've covered a lot of ground, and a really, I'm going to say very powerful simulation. So I would love to thank my panelists right now. Thank you very much for sharing your vast experience, and also your ability to look in the future and tell us like how things are evolving. I'd like to thank the audience, and I'd like to ask you to please follow us on social media, especially our LinkedIn page. We're going to be, Zepo is actually going to be adding more content that is going to be more relevant to this exercise. And then, this is a series of conversations. So obviously, as the threat landscape evolves, as threat actors evolve, as technology evolves, we need to continue the conversation. So please keep a lookout for the next episode in this series, and we're going to be having that posting that about that on LinkedIn shortly, and we'd love to see you there. Thank you very much. Thank you, Antonio.
Thank you, Sandra.
Thank you.
Thank you, Christina.